In a Violent Nature is a horror film written and directed by a guy named Chris Nash. I'm very unfamiliar with his film work. And honestly, this film is not really a horror film at all. I would classify this as like an experimental film, if there's even such a genre. But honestly, this film closely resembles that of a mix between Friday the 13th and kind of like the filming style of Terrifier. Now, I do always enjoy the Friday the 13th films. I hate the Terrifier movies. But In a Violent Nature is way more experimental than just every tropey horror film, in the sense of one shot movements for filming, as well as lengthy scenes of character development and plot progression, and not really much horror. But this does try its best to be a gore fest. And the one thing I can say about the horror gore fest part of it is there are some pretty inventive and creative kills, but with how experimental Chris Nash wrote and directed and filmed this film, it's not really scary at all. I mean, I get it. It's built to kind of crawl under your skin. I get that. The problem I have is the filming style, where it follows mostly the killer. And it does follow the other people, but it mostly follows the killer. And that's fine. Like, that's actually pretty inventive. But the things you think are going to happen ultimately always keep happening. And when they happen, here comes the shock value, and you expect it to happen. Now, like I said, there are some creative, inventive kills which I didn't really expect them to do, so it's not all too predictable. But the writing for the story layout, I'll definitely say, is a little cliche. Now, the writing is actually pretty well done for a horror film, in that you get introduced in the intro to the killer, and then after a while you get introduced to the main players that are going to fight off said killer. And they have great introductions for both of these segments, and I do appreciate that. That's where the good writing came into play. Plus, the introduction was very vague, and it just showed you how this whole story starts and how the creature and killer comes to life. And I appreciated that intro especially. Now, where it falters, I would say, even in the writing, the people that are getting slaughtered, they do stupid, dumb shit. Like, say, for example, you're out in the woods and you don't know things are happening yet, but, like, personally, if I ever go camping in the woods, which I will never do because of these reasons, but if I ever went camping in the woods, I sure as shit am not going for a swim in the fucking lake. If I can't see down to the very bottom, I'm not swimming in that water. And that's one of the kills in this film. And honestly, that's the least graphic kill in this film. And I did appreciate that. It was very subdued. But it ultimately ended up being predictable because it showed the killer go into the water. And I appreciated the lengthy sequence of it because it wants you to build suspense on your own. And I appreciated the filming style in that aspect. But the kills after the suspenseful moments are kind of what really shit the bed throughout this film. The kills are sometimes graphic and gory and inventive, but a lot of the times they're just done and over with. Overall, this was kind of a mixed bag for me because I really appreciate these new filmmakers really putting interest and artistry into horror film. I'd say since Ari Aster blew the water out of horror with Hereditary and then Midsommar and now Beau's Afraid, horror filmmakers have really stepped up their game for horror filmmaking. Now, there are always going to be shitty horror films. Most horror films are shitty. That's always going to be a thing. But I appreciate films like this, In a Violent Nature, where they try their best to do more than expected, more than the usual. And I really did appreciate that. Unfortunately, they always shit the bed as far as the outcome of the murders and the killings and everything. It has a great introduction. It has a good outro. But in the middle section, in the film itself, great filming, great editing, great everything you can think of filming-wise. But that also is a detriment to the horror itself in this film, which is taunted as one of the goriest, shockiest horror films ever made. It's not. There are some inventive and kind of grotesque kills, but this is honestly mostly a tame horror film, but it is very experimental and innovative. So with that, I have to give In a Violent Nature a 7 out of 10 because it's not really scary and the characters just end up doing borderline retarded and stupid shit throughout the whole thing. But it's a very inventive horror film. 7 out of 10 In a Violent Nature. Thank you.